Good morning, Judith Collins, Leader of the Opposition. Thank you for joining us. Jacinda Ardern heads up to Auckland today for the first time since the start of this lockdown. Do you think she'll be met with protests?
Well, I think she might. Certainly there's suggestions of that. But of course, I think it's really important that she gets out to see people, like small business people, I think in particular, go out and see some of the vaccinating people in particularly South Auckland. I suggest she goes and does that. And I'd say to people, just remember that, she hasn't been there for over 12 weeks, but it's always about being respectful and actually giving people their due.
There was a big protest here at Parliament yesterday. A lot of the people protesting yesterday said they felt betrayed both by Labour and by the National Party, just because of the general, endorsement of vaccines and tentative endorsement of vaccine mandates in some areas. What would you say to them?
I think that they would be more concerned if we didn't support vaccinations and we had COVID in an unvaccinated population where people had no ability to be able to fight it other than their own immune system. Because what we've seen is that when we have people who are double vaccinated and they get COVID, that they can be without any symptoms at all, that they may not be in hospital, they won't be able to, they won't end up in an ICU unit, highly unlikely they'll end up there. And it is always about a balance, isn't it? So some people won't like the fact that we have supported restrictions around people who are border-facing workers or those who are in the healthcare system, but we also believe that these mandates do need to have a time an end date as well when it comes to particularly, when we get a highly vaccinated population.
Do you think it's easy to, be scared of the vaccine when you haven't seen, and outside of Auckland, we haven't, COVID ripped through a community unvaccinated? Do you think that would change?
Yeah, I think that if people had seen people that they know going through COVID, that their attitudes might change. But there is an enormous amount of fear with a small, very tiny, but small section and significant section of New Zealand's population around the vaccine, and it's because they see it as new technology. Well, new technology, which is better than the old technology, is all the information I've got on it. And I've talked to a virologist about this, I've talked to people who really have worked with viruses in the lab, and it's really clear that this is better technology than what we've had.
And Jacinda Ardern yesterday said that they did not represent the vast bulk of New Zealanders. That basically, a few ministers put it to the fact that probably more people got vaccinated yesterday than were marching. Is that a fair characterisation, do you think, or is that overly dismissive?
Well, I thought it was a little dismissive. After all, it was an enormous protest, but it wasn't violent. It was a peaceful protest, although it was loud. So the messages I thought were unhelpful. Swastikas are never going to go down well with me or other MPs. But I think it is really important that we remember that there is actually there are people who hate the fact that there are mandates. There are people who don't trust the vaccine, who don't trust Pfizer, who don't trust the government, and it's best not to dismiss them. It's best to deal with their concerns.
A lot of it seemed very American-inspired. There are big Trump flags, American flags, even a QAnon flag, which is a pretty out-there conspiracy theory. What do you make of that? Why do you think people are bringing kind of American culture war issues here?
Because I think they've seen American cultural wars here before. We've seen it in various things. People see on television, they see this on YouTube, they see all these things on social media sites. And so conspiracy theories can spread very, very quickly. Are there conspiracy theories around the vaccine? Yes, there are. Are there some people with genuine concerns? Yes, there are. But those genuinely concerned, there are ways of addressing that, and shouting at them or dismissing them is not the way to do it.
Do you see that out and about in your own base and other parties where suddenly people seem like the number one issue is something that's happening, thousands of kilometres away in the States, that they're really caught up in, Trump didn't lose the election, that kind of thing. Is that worrying for you? America seems to be exporting its social problems.
Yeah, well, America's always exported its cultural issues. Sometimes that works really well on rock music. Personally, I'm a big fan of that. Blues music. But basically, they also export all sorts of other things too. It's simply part of the globalisation that we get this.
You've been talking about how these mandates need to end at some point. We need a sunset clause. Would you want a date in mind, or is it sort of tie it to a target? Or something
I think we
like
need to have some form of targeting on it. That's probably the most sensible way of dealing with it. But I think one of the concerns that people have is this no end in sight for mandates, even though there are public health orders and various other things. That's how they see it, and it is important, I think, when a small part of the population, yes, but it's over 10% of people. It's not insignificant, and I think the way to deal with it is to say, well, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and this is the end date for it, so people can see it. Because there is, that some of those conspiracy theories are definitely out there. There's one that believes that Jacinda Ardern was arrested 2 years ago.
Ankle bracelet.
An ankle bracelet ever since. Look, I'm pretty certain that's not true. In fact, I'm entirely certain it's not true. So why don't we just sort of move past? But you see, you get a whole group of people, but it's best not to dismiss everybody as in that conspiracy mode. There were people there yesterday who just really hate the fact that the government is seen as so bossy, so withholding of information, doesn't bring people along with it, all of them. And so there'll be some people there yesterday who were just saying, we've just sick of this government and sick of the way they behave.
On the, the traffic light system and getting there, realistically, do you think Northland, West Coast or Tairāwhiti are ever hitting 90% double dose when you look at how far back they are now and how much they've slowed down?
It's pretty hard to imagine it, isn't it? Well, great if they do, but I think the whole traffic light system is just bonkers anyway. People are all confused anyway about level 3.2. This constant changing of the goalposts really upsets people. And so when you've got, if you get to 90% double vaccination, then why can't we open up within New Zealand? It just seems completely bizarre that we're not. And even some ridiculous situations of you can go to a doctor to get Botox, but you can't go to your hairdresser to get your hair cut in Auckland at the moment. And you get your hair cut here in Wellington, and everyone's wearing masks as you do it. You can do all of that.
Do you think it looks like the government will do a Freedom Day anyway? So they'll say early December, well, we didn't get to 90, but guess what? It's happening.
Oh, they'll have to do a Freedom Day. I see it, because otherwise they'll start losing more people when it comes to compliance. And that's one of the problems. People are very compliant in New Zealand generally. They understand that that we're all together, a community project, we're going to get vaccinated, we're going to do all these things. People are very compliant. The problem is, and when they think that the government, or they know that the government is holding back information or drip feeding it to them and playing them, they don't like that.
Obviously that will mean Auckland is leaving Auckland.
Yeah.
And you guys don't want very serious controls on that. It seems unworkable. The government seems to kind of admit that it's basically unworkable.
It's bizarre.
Half the ministers do, half the ministers don't. Does that mean that communities outside of Auckland, places like Wellington where we are now, need to accept that they're probably going to have some COVID? Not rampant COVID with an unvaccinated population, but there will be some COVID in the community. Because it seems likely that once Aucklanders can leave, that will happen.
Well, I think too, you probably find there's possibly COVID around the place that people don't know about, because double vaccinated people aren't showing you symptoms, and you tend not to get tested unless you've got symptoms or a reason to get tested. So we don't know about that, but I think it is important that we understand we can't keep locked up forever. In the meantime, it's not only about money and the economy and people's jobs, it's actually about people's mental health as well. And one of the concerns that we've got is on education and what's actually happening to our kids' education. You think about this, you've got a whole cohort now that hasn't had really stable education for the last 18 months. That's not good enough. And so we've got to find ways through.
So to be clear, Gore, Wanaka, Christchurch, Wellington, Turangi, these places are all going to have COVID at some level. And
they've get double vaccinated is the point, isn't it? Wellington's got. Where's the Great Fear? Wellington's got about 96% double vaccinated at the moment.
I'm not saying it's a Great Fear, but do you think these places should accept that it's going to happen?
Well, it's pretty clear that people will come from Auckland. Most of those people, if they're coming on a plane, they will have been tested beforehand, they'll all double vaccinated, they're not the risk, and then we know that they're not the risk. The risk are people who are living in communities where they're not highly vaccinated and they live together in groupings and things. But like as we've seen around the country, when you talk about Auckland, you've got 1.7 million people in Auckland. There's a few people who've got COVID.
On that, I guess, that issue, and finally, of, I guess, communities that have had very high vaccination. Chris Hipkins was talking about this last week. He said, big picture, the government doesn't want to leave anyone behind on vaccines, but it also won't be dragged back people who decide to be left behind. Now that's very hard to kind of work out, right? When is, in your mind, when is someone passed up the opportunity to get vaccinated and said no?
Well, I don't think you do that because, and I think that's a bit harsh from Chris Hipkins. So number one, it could be that people are waiting for the vaccine to come to them. There are some people who will do that. And you say, well, who cares about that? But the fact is, we're going to have boosters. You're going to have vaccinations running all the way through, and while COVID is still around in the world. So you're going to have to continue with this. So just to say, well, they're left behind, we don't care about them. No, that's not good enough. But what you can say is that people believe in personal responsibility. They want the government not to tell them what to do. Well, there are consequences to that if they get COVID. They could get very sick and they could end up in hospital. But people are also saying, the Delta variant in New Zealand, which is more highly transmittable than the first wave of COVID we had. We've had one death that we know of confirmed in COVID, a 93-year-old woman with comorbidities. So people are saying, until they see that there's people they know, you're going to get some people saying, oh, it's not really there. They're not in the ICU units watching people struggling to breathe. They're not dealing with the staff trying to deal with it. But it is really important that people understand it's only one way through, that's vaccinate.
When we look at the people who aren't vaccinated, though, they're the typical people who are in the bottom of the heap in many other ways, right? They live in provincial North Island towns that are extremely deprived, and they're young and disproportionately Māori. Do you think they're anti-vaxxers, or do you think they just don't like interacting with the government?
I think they often don't like interacting with the government. There are also, might I say, some highly educated people who are certainly not deprived in any way, who have not got vaccinated yet. And sometimes that's because even though they are highly educated, they don't trust new technology of the mRNA, and they don't trust the government. So we also need to understand it's many different groups of people. They should never be dismissed, but when they have genuine concerns, and I'm sure they all feel they do have, they need to be addressed. And sometimes people won't take the advice from the government. They might take it from someone else who's not the government. They might take it from their employer. They might take it from someone they know. But it's amazing, a lot of these people will take it from someone they don't know on the internet. But I really do think they do need to understand that just because an internet source might have been right once doesn't mean to say they're always right.
Judith Collins, thank you for your time.
Thank you.